Good morning. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
We'll let a few more folks filter in and we'll get started here in the next couple of minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and just hop on into this. We actually may even finish a smidge early, we'll see. I hope everyone's doing well and happy Friday.
Good morning, Sean.
Good morning. So let's go ahead and hop on into this. So with this slide up, I've given away a spoiler. You all probably already use Lean Six Sigma already. Anyone have one of those things on the right in your
Yes.
silverware drawer? That's what Lean and Lean Six Sigma are about. It's about putting things in their place. It's about, I mean, and I don't know about you, but has anyone ever opened the drawer and found forks where spoons go, or vice versa? And you're like, and you think to yourself, well, who did that and put it where it's supposed to be? That's just kind of what we do, right? Because that's you know, kind of the expectation is things go where they're supposed to go. Well, again, that's part of Lean Six Sigma too, is putting things where they're supposed to be. And I'm sure many of you have been, if you've ever been in a mechanics shop or a lot of workshops where they have the peg boards up and things all in their place, right? And that way you can look at a board and you can see if wrench number whatever is missing. I don't know anything about wrenches, but you know, if whatever some tool is missing, you can see there's an empty spot, right? So you know. Well, part of Lean Six Sigma is doing that with your projects and your processes, and quite frankly, just your workspace, even if it isn't specific to a project, with your workspace in general. Can you do something like that in your own workspace? That's the question. Let's see if I can get this thing to flip over. There we go. All right. And again, I'm not going to read this whole thing to you. I mean, y'all can read it. And again, next week I'll send out the whole slide deck to you all. I'm just waiting to send it because I think I may tweak it a little bit here and there. So I'm going to send it out once rather than bombarding you with several copies. But one thing I want to point out on this slide is that second bullet point where it says one thing it can do for you is reduce your operating expenses. Doesn't mean that you're compromising quality and safety. And that's a really important piece. I want to point that out. It's not about making things faster and better and whatever so you can get things out of the way. It's about improving things across the board, because again, Lean Six Sigma, and again, I sound like a broken record, is about improving quality, right? Reducing costs, reducing risks, eliminating waste, and then by doing all those things, you're inherently improving safety, because if you've got a really well-running process and people are following that process, which is a huge piece of it, right? Then things are gonna be better, and your safety records are gonna be better. And again, we'll talk about this here shortly, and I do sound like a broken record when I talk about the control piece of all of this, but having control when you work a project, putting controls in place that ensure that people can, first of all, can follow that, and then you've got an audit process, something in place so later on, whoever's the manager of that particular project process, whatever that may be, understands, they know how to check to verify, is everyone actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, all right? And again, you all are muted right now. If anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself to ask your question. Right now, I'd like to tell you all this story about this company, Crossroads Kombucha, which is a real company, and they're in Indiana. This was a mom and pop kind of a production facility that made, well, it's not a clever name, they made kombucha. And they were really small. They serviced just basically their local area in Indianapolis. And a few years ago, the owners, two or three owners, they went and attended some Lean Six Sigma courses, well, Six Sigma and then Lean Six Sigma, and learned about this. And so they redesigned their facility. Their salespeople could sell more, but their facility couldn't manufacture more, which of course is not a great place to be in if you want to expand, right? Because obviously if you want to expand, you want more clients, you need to be able to service those clients. So they redesigned their facility. They had the advantage, and I'll take a minute to pause. They had the advantage of they were outgrowing their current facility, and so in the process of moving to the new one, they redesigned their equipment and re-looked at some of their processes, even things not manufacturing related, but sales related, inventory control related, all of those different types of things, and really just basically they gutted their practices. Everything they did, all the processes, they gutted them, they looked at them, they looked at the good, the bad, and the ugly, and said, what is working for us and serving us well, and what isn't, and what can we improve? And they shut down for a full 6 weeks, which not everybody can afford to do, but again, it was conducive to their move. In the process of doing that, so when they ramped back up 6 weeks later, they were in new processes. They redesigned their equipment. And again, they didn't change the equipment itself. They just reconfigured how they set it up inside the building, which was not a huge thing, again, because, you know, they're moving buildings anyway, right? So it's relatively easy to do. And in doing so, they went from being this little mom and pop place that serviced a few local grocery stores in their area to being regional. And they went like lightning. I mean, it's like a salesperson's dream. They went from, I read the numbers on, this is a success story kind of report that was given to me. They went from servicing like 10 or 12 locations to serving about 300 in less than 6 months. And that's just phenomenal growth. I don't know very many salespeople that would turn something like that down, or business owners that would turn something that down. You know, if you can serve it, absolutely, definitely do it. So again, this is like ideal scenario, right? Where someone can come in and say, I'm going to halt everything for a few weeks. I'm going to redesign everything and do that. Most of us don't have that luxury, of course. So what do we do, right? All right, see if I can get this thing to change. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about misconceptions and challenges with Lean Six Sigma. First and foremost, a lot of people think this is only for manufacturing stuff and it doesn't apply. I can't apply it to what I do. I'm in service, I serve people, I provide services. It doesn't apply to me. And that's incorrect. Quite frankly, I've seen big banks use it. We saw those, all of those different big companies I put up on those slides previously, you know, that do it. Some companies that were not on there, of course, were government agencies that use it, that are, you know, Health and Human Services, the federal government uses Lean Six Sigma. Quite frankly, not as much as I would love them to, but they do in pockets, as well as nonprofits use it. Banks use this. And of course, banks are not dealing with, you know, manufacturing anything, and they're serving people, right? Other service industries as well, real estate companies use this. So it's not just for manufacturing, although a lot of the examples kind of are easy examples when we talk about manufacturing. Next one is, a lot of people think, oh, I've got to be a stats genius or math genius because I'm going to have to produce reports, I'm going to have to do crunch numbers, blah, 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 right? And no, that's not the case. And that's the beauty of Lean Six Sigma, because again, because it's a combination of Lean and Six Sigma, you can pick the tools that work most for you and also the tools that you're most comfortable using. Again, we talked about the Yo-No circle, definitely no math involved with that one, right? Brainstorming is a tool. Definitely no math involved with that necessarily. Now, can you dig into that and use those heavy stats ones and all of that? Absolutely. And again, I think I mentioned before, I had someone from a client attend this class about a year ago, maybe 6 months, a year ago, and he ran this big fancy progression analysis with all these charts and all these numbers, which is great. But that was his comfort zone. He's an IT guy and he was working on IT projects, and that's something he was already really comfortable in. So again, I really feel that you're much more successful when you use tools that you're comfortable using. Now, there may be tools that you're like, well, I'm not really familiar with any of them, so I'm not comfortable with any of them. And that's where I come in, where you'll have 6 months to work on your project, and during those 6 months you have access to me as much as you need, so I can help you answer any questions. And even when it comes down to figuring out how much money you've saved, I'm really good at eking out every possible penny and counting every possible penny and dollar of savings, so we can give you the most credit possible, right? Because you know, if we can, you know, really dive deep and dig into all the nooks and crannies, we can make sure that we haven't left any money on the table. All right. Next one is, do I need stakeholder support? And that is an absolute yes. You got to have stakeholders support. And I'm going to stop really quickly and unmute you all. Y'all unmuted, so some of you are a little noisy.
Oh, you can see like his building stuff? I can't see his building.
I'm going to mute Marima because she's noisy. Okay, so question, I'll ask you all, for those of you who know what your project's going to be or what you think it may be, who are going to be some of your stakeholders?
Hi. Stakeholders would be like the client.
For you, the client, for anything you do, Marima, because again, Marima is, for those of you not familiar, she's an on-site at Visible in Utah. So yeah, definitely the client, and potentially the employees that you serve. Potentially also, who else could be stakeholders for you, Maury?
It would be my employees as well, I think.
Right, absolutely, and including like your area manager, right?
Yeah, my whole team.
Your whole, I mean, really, the whole team. Potentially even me. I could potentially be a stakeholder because whatever, if what you're doing, if it affects safety or reduces anything like that, potentially I could be, right? So there's all kinds of different people. So when you've got stakeholders, really think about that and dig into basic. And again, let's define what a stakeholder is. That's someone who's affected by your project. And again, it could be someone higher up, like a client, a manager, a director, somebody higher up, or it could be your team members. It could be the employees you place. It could be even vendors. It could be potential clients.
Dang, they there on the floor.
Okay.
For me, it'd basically be like a whole back office team.
Right.
Going from Dave, trickling down all the way to a division.
Right. And for you, because Maria, for you, your project will be HR related. Honestly, your project's gonna probably touch almost everybody at some point, right?
Yeah.
So then that becomes a challenge too, and that's actually a really great example, because then when you've got, well, gosh, my project affects almost everybody. Are you going to keep every single person involved? Then it becomes picking the key stakeholders that you're going to loop in to be sure that they're up to date. First of all, they know what project you're working, and they have any input like, hey, have you thought of whatever, right? And getting their feedback, because again, you want stakeholder buy-in, and you want them available too, so that when you start making changes, especially, or recommending changes, you've got them on board and opening doors for you. Because certainly we talked about a champion opening doors, but other stakeholders, you can have, quite frankly, multiple champions, and your other stakeholders can definitely be involved with that as well. All right, let's hop to the next one. Okay, so for this one, another next thing is, do I need good measurement systems? Absolutely. One of the reasons you need good measurement systems is you've got to be sure you're measuring the correct thing. And I can give the example of several years ago, I worked at JCPenney at their shared service center in Salt Lake City. So it was their big basically it was their big back office that had like 500 people in it. And I worked with one team that was being measured on credit cards. They were called the credit card team, and it was how many times they were being measured on, and they were getting bonuses on it. They were being measured, quite frankly, they were being hired and fired. They were determining how many people they needed based on credit cards being swiped. Honestly, now this is the team that what they did for credit cards is, I'll back up, what they did for the credit cards is they've resolved any issues. Like if someone swiped their card at a point of sale and it didn't go through for whatever reason, that was the team that helped resolve that issue. If it was a problem with the machine itself, a problem with someone's card, like the card was old, was there not enough, it wasn't about like money in the available, right? And this was specific for their company card. Well, that team basically was just there. They're basically like a version of customer service, right? They resolved any issues that came in. Yet they were being measured on how many times cards were being swiped. They were being measured on something they had no effect on whatsoever. Which, quite frankly, if I'm getting a bonus on something, I want a bonus based on something I can change, something I can affect, right? A bonus based on just this arbitrary number is not very helpful. You're kind of at the whim of how many people go shopping that day in their case. And again, that's not really fair. When we sat down and looked at it, and that's one of the first things I asked once I realized, asking about their KPIs and what they're being measured on. When I was told they were being measured on something that had absolutely nothing, they couldn't affect that. They couldn't make people swipe more. They couldn't pre-fix problems with a machine. I mean, a machine broke, it broke. That wasn't something that they were physically going out and breaking. They were just doing systematic things. So again, they were being measured on something that maybe made sense to whoever made the decision at the time several years before, but to their current manager and me and the rest of the team, when we sat and talked about it, they're like, well, yeah, this doesn't make sense. Let's look at something new to measure this team by. And so in looking through this, one of those team members actually created a Lean Six Sigma project, and that was her project, was coming up with new KPIs. And it ended up being a much more engaged team. They eliminated needing to hire. They were planning on hiring a full FTE, a full-time employee, because quite frankly, engagement went up because they were excited about what they were doing. They realized, they knew now that they were being measured on truly on something they could impact, as opposed to this arbitrary thing that was being determined from on the high. So again, with your projects, make sure you know, have a discussion with your stakeholders. Make sure you're really measuring the correct things. All right, see if I can get this thing to change again. Maybe. There we go. Okay. Next one is, and this is one I'm quite frankly guilty of sometimes, of should I avoid excessive analysis? Absolutely. It is so easy to go down the rabbit hole of, well, I need to look at this, and need to look at this and do here and do this. I mean, do what has value for your project. Don't dive deep. Be able, and I'm a big proponent of hop in, do just enough, right? Do enough that proves your point, so to speak, for your project. Yes, we're here, we need to go here, but you don't need to go, basically I'm saying you don't need to go crazy. All right. And then again, let's talk a little bit more about stakeholders. And I put this quote in here from the Project Management Institute because I think it's a really good definition of a stakeholder. And again, it's like it says here, it's an individual, group, or organization who may be affected by, or perceived to be affected by a decision, outcome, or activity of a project. So I'm gonna unmute y'all, see if I can. And I want to ask y'all, what do you think they have perceived in there?
Does it mean not affected?
Because if someone thinks they're being affected by your project, you're probably gonna, to me, if someone thinks they're being affected by your project and you don't think they are, there's a disconnect somewhere, right? So that sounds to me like you need to have a conversation and verify, are they really not affected by your project? And if so, you can clear that up. Or maybe you'll get new information and find out, oh, wow, they really are. So I need to include them as well. And that's why that perceived, one of the reasons why I really like that quote, because that perceived part, because a big part of all of this is certainly you're improving things and doing that, but God, you got to negotiate and deal with people and work with people and get them, because quite frankly, change is hard for a lot of folks. And you're walking in, you're walking through a door and saying, we're going to change something. Now, ideally, we're changing something for the better, but for some folks are very resistant to change. So it's that negotiation, and dealing with perception is a big piece of it. Okay. So again, talking about stakeholders, this is a really big high level stakeholder, but I like it in general because it's all kinds of, I'm gonna mute y'all again, somebody's noisy. So anyway, again, stakeholders are, of course, this is really high level, but customers, your actual, customers for y'all could be your client, right? Employees, community, who else around is affected by this? Employee families is something that quite frankly, if you're doing something that affects your employee, it's going to affect their families too, right? Ideally for the better. When we're improving things, ideally it should be something that's going to improve things for everyone. And then whatever partners you may have in all of this, it may be your teammates, it may be a supervisor with a client. Think about who those partners may be. Now, for our purposes, we're not going to have a lot of investor type of stakeholders, but then of course government, part of government is the government piece of is thinking about regulations that we have to comply with. Sometimes we think we'd really like to do this, and I've asked this question before, and again, I'm always a big proponent of, no one's ever like roughed me up for asking a question. It never hurts to ask the question. Hey, what would happen if we change, this process from here to here? Can we do this? Sometimes the answer is no, because of government regulations. So it's understanding that piece of it as well. All right. Let's see if I can get this to go over again. All right, so now we're going to talk about DeMayic. It's define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And you can see it's almost always when you see DeMayic shown in a graphic, it's almost always shown in a circle with the arrows, because again, it's trying to emphasize the continuous part of continuous improvement, because you're always in the process of trying to continually improve things. A long time ago, I had a girl that finished a certification project and commented, "I'm so glad I'm done with this, and I don't have to work on projects anymore." And I said, "Well, there is a continuous part of the continuous thing. Are you going to have to work on that same project? Probably not, because you've handed it off to whomever, a stakeholder or whoever owned the project, right? But you may have to check in from time to time, or you may be asked to be pulled in. So it's possible, right?" So, and again, talking about, just reviewing too, I talked earlier about when we do tools for certification. To do the yellow belt certification, you need to do one tool per DeMayic. So one for define, one for measure, one for analyze, one for improve, one for control. For green belt, it's 3 per the DeMayic, so total of 15. All right. And again, y'all are muted right now, but if you have any questions, please do unmute yourself and ask questions, and I'll stop here and there. We're going to go through this and get into this. And this DeMayic is important. I like you. And again, I'm not going to read all of these slides, because these slides are pretty busy. But just understanding what they are. So defining, and that's really where you start when you're working your personal project, or any project in general, whether it's something to certify or anything, is first of all, define what you're doing. What's important? What do you need to do? What are you trying to solve? Asking those really high level questions, right? Like, what am I trying, the who, what, why, where kind of thing. Who's it going to affect? Asking those big things. So define what you're doing. Because I could say something like, well, I want to make things better for my team. Well, great, but what are you going to do? Who on the team? Is it everyone on your team, or is it just some people on your team? Is it the employees as well? So again, it's defining, going through and doing all of that. All right. The next is measure. Then you've got to, again, measure where you are. You always want to measure what they call current state. Where are you right now today? What is going on with your project process that you're trying to improve with your project now? Measure your current state. You want to do that because you want to measure where you are today. So after you make your improvements, you can show what you've done and what the changes have done. So of course, you've got to have that baseline measurement of, like, right now I process X number of employees, or right now I process X number of I-9s, or whatever it is that you're measuring. Have that baseline. I've made my changes, and now my number is here. This is where we've improved. That's how you show that improvement, right? All right, next is analyze. Then this is the fun part. You get to pick everything apart and say, all right, what went wrong? What's going wrong? And why are we even here talking about working on a project to begin with? Working on this, so this is a part where you get to really look and talk about the good, bad, and ugly. And I always like to tell people, because sometimes when someone designed a project or a process, and then someone comes in afterwards and says, well, let's do this project to make it better, people get a little, it's a little hard on the heart, quite frankly. Like, oh, you're kind of taking my baby and you're ripping it apart. And again, it's not about the person, it's about the process. And it's also, it may have been perfect for that point in time, but today we're in a different point in time. So let's look and see what we can improve. Because even something, I mean, I can use a perfect example. I mean, how often do we change our forms internally? Not super often, but we update them from time to time because we're moving and we're changing and we're growing. Same thing, every organization's like that, right? All right, so let's talk about improve real briefly. Improving, that's where you get to do the fun part, which is you've done your analysis, you decided what you're going to do, you decided how you're going to do it, you've talked with people, you've dug in, this is what we're going to do. And then you get to go through and make those improvements and decide what time frame is it going to take. Again, part of going back, we talked previously about scope, deciding what that scope of that project is going to be, what the timeline of that project is going to be, make those improvements, do those ideas. And that's where you'll be doing some activities. And again, it's got activities on here, but you'll be doing things like doing process maps, and we'll talk about that here coming up probably, I think, Wednesday of next week. You will be doing process maps, things like that. So you can be showing, again, where you started, what you've done, and here are your improvements, and then you get to make those improvements, and then you get to do that ta-da stuff, right? Well, when you finish, and this is one that quite frankly I harp on a lot, and that's where you've got to put controls in place. And the controls could be something as simple as you're going to write up an SOP and, you know, standard operating procedure, right? This is how something should be followed. A good way to put controls in place is to have an audit in place, so that you're auditing a process whatever time frame you determine is necessary. You may need to audit once a week, you may need to audit once a month, or maybe you just need to audit every 6 months or every year. Depends on your situation. And if you do not audit or have some sort of control in place, then sorry, I'm trying to unmute y'all because I want to have some conversation here about this. If you don't have controls in place, quite frankly, it's really easy to go gung-ho, okay, we're going to do all this stuff, we've got this stuff, we made these changes, and then over time, gradually, people kind of go back into their old habits, and things go back to where they were. So that's what you want to try to avoid when possible. So I'm gonna ask y'all, do you have any questions? So define, measure, analyze, improve, control. Have any of you started to, if you know your project already, have you started to define what is your project? Let me actually flip back to that slide if I can. Whoops. All right, define. Has anyone actually done, I mean, you probably have, even if you haven't like formally say, I've defined my project. What is your project?
Mine is employee retention at 90%. Trying to retain employees.
So let's use that. That's a really good example. So you've got your definition around that, right? You've got a solid number that you're trying to hit. Do you know what the number? Do you know what the number is now?
No.
So you got to figure out what it is, right? So that's going to be part of your baseline measurements, right? Which again, talking about, see if I can get this thing to change. There we go. So that's where it comes into the measurement piece, right? So that's one of the first things you'll need to be doing with your project is, I need to get to 90%, but where am I now? And I'll ask, why is it going to be beneficial? And I'll ask for everyone, why is it going to be beneficial for her to understand where she is today?
So we have a target, we have a goal, we can plan, good planning, I mean, is the answer to be successful.
Right. Well, and for selfish reasons, quite frankly, you want to know where you are today so that when you hit that 90%, you can tell you can say how much you've improved, right? Because if you're at, I'll throw out a number, if you're at 30% and you've gone all the way to 90%, well, wow, that's fantastic, right? And then you can actually put it, and you can also start to put numbers to it and cost savings to that. That's where you start to be able to really define cost savings. That's where you start to really be able to dig in and get those numbers. So that's with everyone. And I'll ask, has anyone else defined their project or picked a project even? Maria, I know you've got a project going.
I do. I want to, sorry, I can't think today. Having an off day.
That's okay, it's Friday.
I'm going to work with back office and HR so we can find a better way to have retention with our employees and customers so that we're not spending so much money on employees who are not qualified, employees who fail drug tests. Happy customers, happy employees make our clients the clients of choice.
So that's great. So along those lines, do you know where we are today? Do you know what the numbers are of the success, we'll call it the success rate of however you're defining success? Or conversely, do you know what the defect rate is or what the problem rate is for all those different things you're measuring?
I think right now, the biggest issue we've had is that we're just kind of filling orders, not really interviewing or scooping out our employees to send them out. So that costs us money. Our clients don't really know most of the time how many actual people they need. So we'll fill an order and then they get sent home. So what do we now have to do? Pay a show up time. Yeah, those are some of my points.
Right. So
we spent $5 per drug test. You know, we have employees who fail drug tests and then we're just wasting money.
Right. So again, that's all part of that definition part, right? You're going to look at all, you've got a lot of working parts with yours, and your project is definitely going to end up being a green belt. But going through all these different pieces, and we can work on that together as well. And obviously Kyle will be involved as well. But defining all these different points that you want to look at and improve on, right? Because you've got a multifaceted, basically you've got a very multifaceted project that's going to have a really great impact on this company, which is exciting. I'm excited to see y'all get these projects done, because these are all fantastic projects. Does anyone else have one they want to share?
I have one. Well, I've been working on it for a while, you could say. So with every new employee that applies, I've been noticing some of their profiles, like their I-9s, they don't give them, they leave out their social, they leave out their email, they leave out like important things that need to be on the I-9. And that's taking away more time because we have to go back to them and be like, hey, you know, this isn't complete before we could finish the process. You need to go back, fix it. And, you know, it's just a lot more time consuming than if it just gives them a hard stop, like, hey, you can't continue without putting in that information in. And it's not for every profile. I've seen like 1 or 2 per day that I would say when it comes to doing that. So I have reached out to TempWorks and we're trying to see what we could do to fix that.
Okay, and that's great. So again, you're already defining specific things, specific fields that you want to do that. You're already talking about ways to improve that. And again, and that's great. I'm like that you said you reached out to TempWorks, because when you can automate things, the more successful you tend to be. When you create a process that requires, you know, somebody, Bob, and again, I always throw an imaginary person named Bob under the bus, but you're always requiring Bob to do something specific, your success rate is going to be much lower than we just updated something within a system. So it will always do that. So you can still do an audit every once in a while just to make sure your system is functioning regularly, rather than having to always kind of check in with Bob to verify that it's done. It's a lot easier to check-in process and control process, right? So one thing I'm going to do for all of you is I'm going to create a spreadsheet and send it out to all of you. And you've all already got the template spreadsheet, but I'm going to send one that's kind of just a very high level. I'll send it out to you all, or a questionnaire. I'll send it back. And maybe what I'll do this, and then I apologize, I'm thinking aloud. What I'll do is I'll send you all out each a questionnaire just asking, have you identified what your project is? Just give it a title, whatever you want to call it. You know, HR back office, missing information in TempWorks, whatever you want to call it. You choose your name, and again, name's not set in stone. If you want to change the name or whatever, and then just I'll ask you each to give me the name your project, and give me like a couple sentence description of what your project is what you're trying to accomplish. And then I'm going to ask a third question, which is, who is your champion? Who do you think your champion should be for this project? And again, y'all remember what a champion is? That's someone who helps you break down barriers and get things done. So if it's someone in HR, obviously that would be Kyle. If it's something, you know, related to a client, it may be your area manager, or it may be the division president, right? So I'll ask those 3 questions. I'll send out an email later today, and if you would all each reply to me by Wednesday, then I'll just create that general spreadsheet, and then once we've got that general spreadsheet up and going, then I'll send it out for y'all to access, and then you can update it as you want. And it's just really high level, and I like to do that mainly so that our managers and stuff can see the great stuff that you all are doing, because I really want to give you all an opportunity to give yourselves an attaboy when you do work on these projects. And I will say again, at the risk of repeating myself, that I really do encourage you all to certify if possible. It's incredibly important. It will be incredibly important for you professionally, certainly in your current role and any future role you may have. When it comes time to sit down for a review, having this, you know, on your virtual silver platter of, here's some of the things I accomplished, is really nice to be able to say you've done, right? I've done this, I'm capable of this, I accomplished this. This is an opportunity for y'all to do that. I've been in situations where certification has been required. Here at SMART, it's not required, it's at your convenience. And quite frankly, I've made it about as easy as I can possibly make it, because you got 6 months to work on it, and you have access to me again to accomplish what you want to accomplish, and work on tools if you need help with tools. And again, we'll talk more about tools here coming up, but we'll do that as well. All right.
Yes.
So I'm going to stop there. I actually have a few more things, but I'm going to stop there just because I feel like the next section, if I jump into it, it's going to get crazy, and it's going to stop at a really weird, awkward spot. And I'd rather stop here. Does anyone have any questions?
No.
Oh gosh, y'all are easy. All right. Well, have a wonderful Friday. And a great weekend. Thank you so much for what you do. And as always, call me, text me, email me. I'm available on all of those regardless of the time. And let me know. And again, do expect to see that email here by the end of today. Close the business, COB, close the business today. I will send that out.
Okay.
Sorry,
I didn't know what that meant.
See, you didn't have to say anything. I thought, well, if you didn't, you know, not everyone knows that term, right? So that's good. So again, close the business today. By the end of the day today, I'll send it out. And please do send it back at your convenience, but ideally by the next session Wednesday morning, and we'll get it done. All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.